I don't think I'm telling any secrets by saying this was a challenging week. There were lots of needs this week, and I'm not used to some of those, even many of those, being my own. So this Sunday's sermon has been even more challenging to write. I told Georgie Holcomb that people would have to forgive me for this week for being a little more scattered than I usually am. There's no question I'm usually a little scattered and busy, but this week was definitely over the top. As I began to read and prep for this sermon a couple of weeks ago, I kept thinking of how this text that we're going to share ties into Thanksgiving. I began to pray about it, dwell in it, and I realized that where I needed to go was that Jesus did not give up, and specifically did not give up on us. But that's the ending. That's not the journey. We have texts in both Testaments, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, where Scripture reminds us over and over again that God is faithful, that God is just, and that we have not been forgotten. This is one of Paul's favorite topics, and in all honesty, one of mine as well. I love to talk about this. I would probably preach on this topic half the time if I didn't force myself to preach on other topics. It's very easy, especially when we are struggling, to wander away from God and to wonder, why on earth is this happening to me, God? Make this go away. But as I said last week, God never promised us a freedom from pain, a freedom from suffering. God promised us that God would walk through it with us. So as I began to write a little over a week ago, something came up and I got pulled away. When I came back to that sermon, I realized I couldn't write anymore. I didn't know what it was, but it was clear that God was speaking. Wait, you're not ready to write yet. So I stopped and I began to pray. God, may the words of my mouth, may the meditations of my heart bring glory to you. So I waited. As I said earlier, it's fairly easy to get lost in today's world. We could be forgiven for being angry, frustrated, and lost. We can be forgiven for being angry at God, for being frustrated with not understanding what God is doing. This week, I was a little angry. I was frustrated. And I wasn't sure how to deal with it. But what I realized is that God is big enough to deal with the fact that Tom is angry. That Tom is angry at God, frustrated with God. And I believe with my whole heart, with everything that I am, that God is faithful, even though Tom is angry. So I was waiting And suddenly it didn't matter that we had been preparing for her passing for weeks and months. Honestly, I can tell you we've been preparing for her passing for nearly a decade. 10 years ago, this month maybe even, she had a surgery that she wasn't expected to survive. We had called the entire family in to be there because we thought she would die on the table. But God wasn't done. The reality of this loss, of her being gone, struck home. As I began to process this news that Bernie had claimed the rewards of her baptism, I will tell you, for the first 24 hours, I was just sort of numb. Tuesday, I began to feel more and more, and I was a little bit like an exposed nerve. Everything was painful. I had trouble focusing. I had trouble planning. I had trouble responding to texts. And oh, by the way, I want to say thank you to all of you who reached out, who messaged us, who prayed for us. Your words, your sympathies, your prayers mean the world to me. Thank you. As I sit back and look at this week, this morning I found the Footprints poem again. I love that poem. I got to see again from a new perspective, what it means for God and Jesus to walk alongside us. And as I'm remembering that and praying through that, I also remembered an addition to that poem that I found on Facebook a couple of years ago. We know the story that Jesus meets a man in heaven, and they're looking back over the course of this man's life, and they can see the footprints where Jesus walked alongside him. And then the man looks at the footprints and sees them alone and says, "Why did you leave me in the times where I was suffering the most?" And Jesus said to him, "My son, I didn't leave you. Those are the times I carried you." The Facebook addition to that poem is that then there were drag marks. And my son, and those are the drag marks where I drug you kicking and screaming where you didn't want to go. I might have had that kind of week this week. But our text this week is even as challenging as all of that. So let's look at the crucifixion of Jesus. Luke 23, 33 through 43. When they had come to the place called the Skull, Golgotha, we know that name, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." And they divided his clothes and cast lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. And they said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers came up. They mocked him. They offered him wine with vinegar. And they said, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." And there was written a notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there was hurling insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself. Save us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Do you not fear God? Since you are under the same sentence, we are being punished justly. We are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing." Then he turns to Jesus and said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." May God's word bless you today. May it guide you and inform your faith as we prepare for the season of Advent and as we prepare to celebrate Thanksgiving. As I said a moment ago, I tried to work on this service on Tuesday, but clearly that was not a good day. I struggled to put words on paper, and my spirit was telling me to wait again. Now, my wife would tell you I don't do that very well. I don't have a whole lot of patience, but I did in this moment leave the sermon for another day. But by Wednesday morning, I was getting antsy. I don't put things off anymore. I get them done. I dive in and do them as they come up. And so, as I drove to church on Wednesday morning, I heard a song by Mercy Me. And I had that light bulb moment, that moment of faith where God speaks. And you go, okay, God, I get it. Sometimes we just have to be patient and wait on God to reveal the things we need to know. The song's title is You Reign, and it speaks powerfully about the love of Jesus, about the faith of Jesus, that God is faithful no matter what else is going on. We must praise God. We must not give up and forget that Jesus Christ reigns. I want you to look at this text to see what is happening, to see the way it moves, to see what they're doing. Luke makes it clear to us that there is a double meaning going on here, that there is more than one thing happening, that in this very moment, human power is at its worst. Not only is Jesus being executed and humiliated, but the world is making its statement. We are in charge. We are the powerful. The leaders scoff and mock Jesus. The criminal derides. The collective murdering machine of Rome is in full power. And they are communicating to everyone who sees that this man, this Jesus, is not powerful. We're not killing him because he is powerful. We are killing him because he is nothing and thought he was powerful. The mocking and daring at the cross followed the same theme. Are you a king or not? If you are, do something. Prove you are the Messiah. Prove you are a king. One criminal taunted. Most of us can point at a time in our lives when we have been that first criminal. When we don't understand what is going on. When we have been in moments of wrenching pain, moments of despicable evil, wringing our hands, beseeching God, if you are really God, then please do something. I think I was that criminal this week. Not because I didn't want Bernie to go to heaven. I need you to understand that. I celebrate that she has claimed the rewards of her baptism. similarly, we've been that second criminal, the one who recognized who truly held the power that day. The one who loved us enough to endure the cross. And we cry out, Jesus, remember me. I had that moment this week too. We must seek to have the eyes and the heart of that second criminal. We must not fail to see when Jesus carries us in those moments. We must not fail to see when Jesus drags us kicking and screaming through those moments too. In spite of everything, in spite of everything we endure, in spite of all that is going on, in spite of all the pain, the utter exhaustion, humiliation, and suffering, Jesus did not give up. In fact, I want you to hear the words he shared because they remain profound to me. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. Hear that again. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. I need you to understand why that is profound. These are the very beings that God and Jesus created. These are the very creation itself that Jesus is standing on. And they nailed him to a tree. And he forgave them. I don't know if you remember or not, but John chapter 10, verse 18 is an equally powerful text, and it says, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, but I also have the authority to take it up again. This is the charge from my Father. Jesus did not give up. God was faithful. Jesus was faithful. The people who were doing this thought they were exercising power. They thought they were powerful. But Jesus' words and actions belie that power. They remind us of who truly had power that day, who truly reigns. No matter our spot in this life, we have not been left alone. And we must remember who truly reigns. Which brings me back to Wednesday morning. That song. It is amazing to me the way God works. So hear these words. Even before there was a drop in the ocean, even before there was a star in the sky, even before the world was put in motion, you were on your throne. You reign in glory in the highest. You reign. Let all of creation testify to your name. Your name, every knee will bow. Every tongue will proclaim that Jesus reigns. Even before your hands made the heavens, even before the breath of all mankind, even before we needed to be forgiven, you were on your throne. Let all the world proclaim you reign. This song touched my heart. It reminded me of just how central Jesus Christ is to my life. The study of Jesus Christ is called Christology. It has to do with, it's a branch of theology that studies to the person, the nature, and the role of the Christ. Christology is a Greek word that literally translates the word of Christ. I would tell you that I have a pretty high Christology. I believe that the role of Christ is paramount to my faith, paramount to my redemption. But I do not let it blind me to the fact that God was in the redemption business before Jesus was on that cross. But here's where I end up this week before Thanksgiving, in a text of Jesus going to the cross. God has not given up on us. Jesus has not given up on us. When I read that prayer of Jesus, I read that prayer as Jesus praying for each and every one of us, not just those people that were doing harm to him, not just those people who were nailing him to that cross, but each and every one of us that sits here today. Jesus was praying for us on that cross. So when we don't understand, when we are angry, when we are frustrated, and yes, when we are thankful, we must remember that Jesus reigns. I don't say this to diminish grief you're walking through. I don't say this to diminish the hardships that this week has brought. Rather, I cry out in joy that Jesus reigns. I cry out with triumph that Jesus Christ is on his throne. And that is a balm to my soul. It is a balm to a hurting and wounded heart. I celebrate today that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. He is the author and perfecter of my faith. He is the author and perfecter of our faith. If you don't know this one named Jesus, please let us share him with you. As we cry out together, you reign. Would you pray with me? Holy and gracious God, as we prepare to enter this week of Thanksgiving, as we prepare to enter the season of Advent, we celebrate that you reign. We are grateful. Humbled by your presence, that you would walk through our journey with us, that you would carry us, that you would support us. Thank you for our redemption. Thank you. And as the angels said,